In the grand ballrooms of Europe's most exclusive circles, where champagne flows like water and secrets hide behind diamond tiaras, three people are about to discover that the cruelest betrayals often come wrapped in the most beautiful lies. What happens when a woman creates an entire royal identity to escape her past, only to find herself torn between two men who represent everything she's running from and everything she's fighting for? When love collides with deception, when loyalty battles survival, and when the truth threatens to destroy not just hearts, but entire legacies built on carefully crafted illusions. This is the story of Elena Marchetti, a woman who dared to reinvent herself as royalty; Antonio Rivera, the man who loved her without knowing who she really was; and Prince Gabriel of Montenegro, who saw through her lies but chose to protect them anyway. Their paths crossed in the glittering world of European high society, where a single revelation can topple kingdoms of the heart, and where the price of love might be higher than any of them are willing to pay. Some stories of the heart are written in ink. This one was written in tears, blood, and the kind of courage that only comes when you have everything to lose and nothing left to hide behind. Prepare yourself for a journey through the shadows of nobility, where the greatest royalty isn't born from bloodlines, but from the strength to love, lose, and rise again. Elena Marchetti stood before the ornate mirror in her suite at the Hotel Splendido, adjusting the sapphire necklace that had cost her 3 months of savings. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the frightened girl who had fled Naples 5 years ago with nothing but a suitcase and a burning desire to disappear. Tonight, she was Princess Elena of San Marino, a title that existed only in the carefully constructed fantasy she had built around herself. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had taken years of studying royal protocols, perfecting her accent, learning the intricate dance of European high society. She had watched from the shadows, memorizing how real princesses moved, spoke, and carried themselves. Every gesture had been practiced until it became second nature. Every story rehearsed until the lies felt like memories. Her fingers trembled slightly as she fastened the diamond earrings, a nervous habit she couldn't quite shake despite all her preparation. The Monte Carlo Charity Gala was the most important event of the social season, and tonight would determine whether her carefully crafted identity could withstand the scrutiny of Europe's elite. 5 years of building this new life, and it all came down to one evening. The suite door chimed softly, and her assistant, Marie, entered with a warm smile. Marie was one of the few people who knew fragments of Elena's true story, though even she didn't know the full extent of the deception. Elena had rescued Marie from a similar situation in Paris, and the young woman's loyalty was absolute. "Princess, the car is ready," Marie said, using the title that had become as natural as breathing. "You look radiant tonight." Elena turned from the mirror, her reflection catching the light of the crystal chandelier. The woman in the glass was sophisticated, confident, every inch the aristocrat she pretended to be. But inside, her heart raced with the familiar fear that someone would see through the facade, that tonight would be the night her house of cards came tumbling down. "Thank you, Marie. Have you confirmed the guest list one more time?" "Yes, Princess. Prince Gabriel of Montenegro will be attending, as will the Duke of Ferrara and his family. The Spanish delegation is also expected." Marie paused, consulting her tablet. "And Antonio Rivera, the art dealer from Rome, has confirmed his attendance." Elena's breath caught at the mention of Antonio's name. She had been avoiding him for weeks, ever since their last encounter at a gallery opening in Venice. There had been something in his eyes that night, a recognition that made her skin crawl with panic. Antonio had a way of looking at people that made them feel exposed, as if he could see straight through to their soul. "Very well," Elena managed, keeping her voice steady. "Let's not keep them waiting." The drive to the Monte Carlo casino was a blur of glittering lights and expensive cars. Elena sat in the back of her hired Bentley, watching the Mediterranean coastline through tinted windows. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was heading to a charity gala designed to help those less fortunate, when she herself was perhaps the most elaborate fraud in attendance. As the car pulled up to the red carpet entrance, Elena took a deep breath and summoned the princess she had created. The transformation was remarkable to watch. Her shoulders straightened, her chin lifted, and a serene smile graced her lips. The nervous woman from the hotel suite vanished, replaced by royalty. Cameras flashed as she stepped from the car, her emerald gown trailing behind her like liquid silk. The dress had been another careful investment, chosen to complement her dark hair and olive complexion while maintaining the elegance expected of someone of her supposed station. She had learned that in this world, appearance wasn't just important, it was everything. "Princess Elena," called out photographers, and she turned toward them with practiced grace, offering the perfect smile she had perfected in front of mirrors. The title still sent a small thrill through her, even after all this time. It represented everything she had fought to become, everything she had sacrificed her past to achieve. The casino's grand entrance was a symphony of marble and gold, filled with Europe's most prominent figures. Elena moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who belonged, exchanging pleasantries in flawless Italian, French, and English. She had spent countless hours perfecting her linguistic skills, understanding that language was often the first test of authenticity in these circles. "Princess Elena, how wonderful to see you again." The Countess of Montpellier approached with the enthusiasm of someone who collected royal acquaintances like trophies. "I was just telling the Duke about your charitable work in Eastern Europe. Such dedication to those poor children." Elena smiled warmly, slipping into the role as easily as breathing. The charity work was real, one of the few authentic aspects of her new life. She had discovered that helping others gave her a sense of purpose that made the deception feel less hollow. "The children are incredibly resilient," Elena replied, her voice carrying just the right note of humble passion. "We can learn so much from their strength in the face of adversity." As the evening progressed, Elena found herself relaxing into the familiar rhythm of these events. She knew exactly how long to spend with each group, when to laugh, when to look concerned, when to gracefully excuse herself. It was a performance, but one she had come to master completely. That comfort was shattered the moment she saw him across the room. Prince Gabriel of Montenegro stood near the champagne fountain, his tall frame commanding attention without effort. Unlike the other men in attendance, who wore their titles like expensive accessories, Gabriel possessed a natural authority that made Elena's carefully constructed confidence feel like tissue paper. His dark eyes swept the room with the casual assessment of someone born to lead, and when they landed on her, she felt exposed in a way that terrified her. Their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, and Elena felt her carefully maintained composure waver. Gabriel's expression was unreadable, but there was something in his gaze that suggested he saw more than she was comfortable revealing. She had heard stories about his intelligence, his ability to read people, his reputation for seeing through facades that fooled everyone else. Before she could look away, he began moving toward her with the confident stride of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. Elena's mind raced through her options, but there was nowhere to run without causing a scene. She was trapped in her own web of lies, face to face with perhaps the one person who might unravel everything she had built. "Princess Elena," Gabriel said as he approached, his voice carrying the slight accent of his homeland. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I am Gabriel." He didn't need to announce his title or credentials. Everyone in the room knew exactly who he was. Elena extended her hand, hoping he wouldn't notice the slight tremor in her fingers. "Your Highness," she replied, allowing him to take her hand. His touch was warm and firm, and she was acutely aware of how he studied her face as he lifted her hand to his lips in a gesture that was both traditional and somehow intimate. "I've heard fascinating things about your work in San Marino," Gabriel continued, releasing her hand but maintaining that unsettling eye contact. "Though I must admit, I'm having trouble placing your family in the usual genealogical records. Elena's heart stopped for a fraction of a second, but her training kicked in immediately. She smiled with the gentle patience of someone accustomed to such questions. My family has always been rather private, she said smoothly. We prefer our charitable work to speak for us rather than our ancestry. It was a perfect deflection, the kind of answer that sounded humble while providing no real information. She had practiced responses like this hundreds of times, preparing for exactly this kind of moment. Gabriel's smile suggested he found her answer interesting rather than satisfying. How refreshingly modern of you. In my experience, those with the most to offer are often the most reluctant to discuss their heritage. Before Elena could respond, another voice interrupted their conversation. Princess Elena, I've been looking everywhere for you. She turned to see Antonio Rivera approaching, his handsome face lighting up with the kind of smile that had made him one of Rome's most eligible bachelors. Antonio was everything Gabriel was not. Warm where Gabriel was mysterious, approachable where Gabriel was intimidating, open where Gabriel seemed to see too much. Elena had met Antonio 6 months ago at a gallery opening in Florence. He was a successful art dealer with connections throughout Europe's cultural elite, and he had been pursuing her with the patient persistence of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. What made Antonio dangerous wasn't his suspicious nature. It was how much she genuinely cared for him. Antonio, Elena said, genuine warmth entering her voice for the first time that evening. I didn't realize you'd arrived. Just got in from Rome, Antonio replied, leaning in to kiss her cheek. The gesture was familiar, intimate in a way that didn't go unnoticed by Gabriel. I brought something I thought you might enjoy seeing. He produced a small velvet box from his jacket pocket, and Elena's heart skipped for an entirely different reason. The timing couldn't have been worse, with Gabriel watching every nuance of their interaction with those penetrating eyes. Antonio, you really shouldn't have, Elena protested, though her curiosity was evident. It's a pendant that belonged to Catherine the Great, Antonio explained, opening the box to reveal an exquisite ruby surrounded by diamonds. I thought it would suit someone with your appreciation for history. The gift was breathtaking and obviously expensive, but it represented everything Elena feared about her relationship with Antonio. His generosity came from genuine affection, which made accepting his gifts feel like theft. She was taking his heart under false pretenses, building a relationship on foundations that didn't exist. It's beautiful, but I can't possibly accept something so valuable, Elena said, though her refusal sounded weak, even to her own ears. Of course you can, Antonio insisted, taking the pendant from the box. Turn around. Let me put it on you. Elena hesitated, acutely aware of Gabriel's presence and the intimate nature of Antonio's request. In royal circles, such gestures carried significance, marking territory and relationships for all to see. She found herself caught between two impossible choices: reject Antonio's gift and risk hurting him, or accept it and make a statement she wasn't prepared to make. Perhaps the princess would prefer to wait for a more private moment, Gabriel suggested, his tone carefully neutral, but somehow carrying an undercurrent of challenge. Antonio's eyes flashed with irritation as he noticed Gabriel for the first time. I'm sorry, I don't believe we've met. Prince Gabriel of Montenegro, Gabriel replied, extending his hand with the easy confidence of someone who never doubted his place in any room. Elena watched the two men size each other up, recognizing the subtle territorial display playing out before her. She had become the prize in a contest she never wanted to enter, between a man who loved an illusion and a man who saw too clearly for comfort. Antonio Rivera, Antonio replied, accepting Gabriel's handshake with the wariness of a man recognizing a rival. I represent several private collections throughout Italy. How interesting, Gabriel said. I imagine you encounter all sorts of fascinating artifacts in your work. Some authentic, some less so. The comment hung in the air like a challenge, and Elena felt panic rising in her chest. Gabriel's words could have been innocent, but the way his eyes flicked to her suggested a deeper meaning. Authentication is crucial in my field, Antonio replied carefully. I pride myself on being able to distinguish the genuine from the merely beautiful. Elena realized she was holding her breath. The conversation had moved beyond pleasantries into something more dangerous, with her at the center of it. She needed to regain control before things escalated further. "Gentlemen, perhaps we could continue this fascinating discussion over dinner," she suggested, her voice carrying just enough authority to remind them both of her supposed rank. "I believe they're seating us now." The evening that followed was a masterclass in European diplomacy, with Elena navigating between Antonio's obvious affection and Gabriel's subtle challenges. During dinner, she found herself seated between them, forced to maintain conversations with both, while desperately trying to avoid saying anything that might expose her. Gabriel proved to be as intelligent as his reputation suggested, discussing art, politics, and history with the ease of someone who had received the finest education money could buy. Worse, he seemed genuinely interested in her opinions, asking questions that required more than the rehearsed responses she had prepared. "I'm curious about your perspective on the restoration work being done in Montenegro," Gabriel said during the second course. "Given your family's history with similar preservation efforts." It was a trap beautifully laid. Elena had no idea what restoration work he was referring to, and any attempt to fake knowledge would only dig her deeper into trouble. "I'm afraid I haven't kept up with your latest projects as closely as I should," she replied, turning the deflection into a question. "Perhaps you can enlighten me?" Gabriel's smile suggested he appreciated her skillful evasion. "We're restoring a 14th century monastery that was damaged during the war. The frescoes alone are worth preserving for future generations." He went on to describe the project in detail, and Elena found herself genuinely interested despite her nervousness. Gabriel's passion for preserving his country's heritage was evident, and she recognized a kindred spirit in his dedication to protecting something precious from destruction. "It sounds like incredibly important work," Elena said, and for once her response was completely genuine. Preserving history is preserving identity. Something shifted in Gabriel's expression at her words. The calculating look softened, replaced by what might have been approval. "Exactly," he agreed. "Too often, people are so focused on creating new identities that they forget the value of honoring what came before." The comment hit Elena like a physical blow. Gabriel's words seemed to look straight into her soul, acknowledging both her deception and her reasons for it. She felt exposed and understood in equal measure, a combination that left her breathless. Antonio, who had been listening to their exchange with growing frustration, chose that moment to reclaim her attention. "Elena, I was hoping you might consider visiting Rome next week," he said, his voice carrying an urgency that suggested this wasn't a casual invitation. "There's something important I want to discuss with you." Elena's mind raced. She could hear the weight behind his words, the implication that he was ready to take their relationship to a new level. The ruby pendant at her throat felt like a chain, binding her to expectations she could never fulfill. "I'm not sure my schedule will allow for it," she replied carefully. "I have several charity commitments that require my attention." It was a weak excuse, and everyone at the table knew it. Antonio's face showed his disappointment, while Gabriel watched the exchange with the interest of someone reading a particularly complex text. As the evening wound down, Elena found herself exhausted from the constant vigilance required to maintain her facade. Every conversation had been a potential minefield, every smile a calculated performance. She longed for the simplicity of her suite at the hotel, where she could drop the mask and simply be herself, whoever that was anymore. The final challenge came as guests began to leave. Elena was saying her goodbyes when Gabriel approached her once more, his expression serious. "Princess Elena, might I have a word in private?" It wasn't really a request, and Elena felt the familiar spike of panic. But refusing would only create more suspicion, so she nodded graciously. Gabriel led her to a quiet alcove overlooking the Mediterranean, where the sound of waves provided cover for their conversation. For a moment, they stood in silence, watching the moonlight dance on the water. "You're not who you claim to be," Gabriel said finally, his voice quiet but certain. Elena felt her world tilt on its axis. After 5 years of careful construction, her entire identity was crumbling with 4 simple words. She could deny it, of course, but something in Gabriel's tone suggested he wasn't guessing. "I'm not sure what you mean," she replied, though her voice lacked conviction. Gabriel turned to face her, and in the moonlight, his features seemed carved from marble. "I mean that Princess Elena of San Marino doesn't exist in any official capacity. San Marino hasn't had a royal family in over a century." The words hung between them like a death sentence. Elena felt her carefully constructed world collapsing around her, 5 years of work destroyed in a single moment. She waited for the accusations, the threats, the inevitable exposure that would follow. Instead, Gabriel did something completely unexpected. "Who are you really?" he asked, his voice gentle rather than accusing. "And why do you need to pretend to be someone else?" Elena stared at him in shock. She had prepared for many contingencies, but kindness wasn't one of them. Gabriel's question came from curiosity rather than malice, and that somehow made it harder to answer. "Why aren't you exposing me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the waves. Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the moonlight. "Because everyone has reason for the masks they wear," he said finally. "Some masks are chosen. Others are forced upon us by circumstances beyond our control." His understanding threatened to undo her completely. Elena had spent so long expecting discovery and condemnation that compassion felt foreign, dangerous. It would be easier if Gabriel were cruel. Cruelty, she understood. Kindness terrified her. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "The truth," Gabriel replied simply. "Or at least as much of it as you're willing to share." Elena looked out at the moonlit sea, feeling the weight of 5 years of deception pressing down on her. For the first time since she had created Princess Elena, she found herself wanting to tell someone who she really was. The loneliness of living a lie had been eating at her for years, and Gabriel's unexpected kindness offered something she hadn't dared hope for: understanding. But as she opened her mouth to speak, she caught sight of Antonio through the glass doors, searching the crowd for her. The sight of him reminded her of everything she stood to lose, not just for herself, but for the people who had come to care for the woman she pretended to be. "I can't," she whispered, the words torn from her throat. "You don't understand what you're asking." Gabriel followed her gaze to Antonio, and his expression grew thoughtful. "He loves you," he observed. "He loves someone who doesn't exist," Elena replied, the pain evident in her voice. "How can I tell him that the woman he cares for is nothing but smoke and mirrors?" "Perhaps," Gabriel said slowly, "the woman he loves is more real than you think. Identity isn't just about bloodlines and titles, princess. Sometimes it's about the choices we make and the love we give." His words offered a perspective Elena had never considered, but before she could explore the idea further, Antonio appeared at the alcove entrance. "There you are," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I was starting to worry." Elena forced a smile, slipping back into character with the ease of long practice. But something had changed in those few moments with Gabriel. A seed of possibility had been planted, and she found herself wondering if the truth might not destroy everything she had built after all. The ride back to her hotel was quiet, but Elena's mind was racing. Gabriel's words echoed in her thoughts, challenging everything she believed about herself and her situation. For 5 years, she had lived in fear of discovery, but tonight she had encountered something far more dangerous than exposure: hope. As she prepared for bed, removing the jewels and gown that marked her royal status, Elena caught sight of herself in the mirror once more. The woman looking back was no longer the confident princess from earlier in the evening. She was someone caught between worlds, no longer sure where the performance ended and the truth began. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to maintain her facade or risk everything for honesty. But tonight, for the first time in years, Elena allowed herself to imagine what it might feel like to be loved for who she really was, rather than who she pretended to be. The ruby pendant from Antonio lay on her dresser, catching the light from the bedside lamp. It represented a love built on illusion, beautiful but ultimately false. Yet Gabriel's words suggested that perhaps the line between illusion and reality wasn't as clear as she had always believed. As sleep finally claimed her, Elena found herself dreaming not of royal courts and grand ballrooms, but of a simpler truth, the possibility that beneath all the lies and pretense, there might still be something real worth saving. The morning sun streaming through the silk curtains of Elena's suite felt different somehow, as if Gabriel's revelation the night before had changed the very quality of light in her world. She sat at her antique writing desk, staring at the blank piece of hotel stationery before her, trying to find words for a letter she wasn't sure she could send. 3 days had passed since the Monte Carlo gala, and Elena found herself caught in an impossible situation. Gabriel had given her his private contact information before leaving, along with an invitation to visit Montenegro whenever she felt ready to talk. His discretion was both a gift and a burden. She was safe from immediate exposure, but the weight of his knowledge hung over her like a storm cloud. Antonio had called twice yesterday, his messages growing more urgent each time. His voice carried the excitement of a man preparing to make a life-changing declaration, and Elena's heart broke a little more with each missed call. She had built their relationship on quicksand, and now she could feel it shifting beneath them both. Marie entered quietly, carrying the morning's newspapers and correspondence. Her young face showed concern as she placed the silver tray on Elena's desk. "Princess, you haven't eaten anything since yesterday evening. Shall I order breakfast from the restaurant?" Elena looked up from the blank page, noting the worry in her assistant's eyes. Marie had become more than an employee over the past 2 years. She was the closest thing Elena had to family, and the thought of losing that relationship when the truth came out was almost unbearable. "Just coffee, please," Elena replied, then paused. "Marie, may I ask you something personal?" The young woman nodded, settling into the chair across from the desk with the easy familiarity of their relationship. "When you discovered who I really was, what made you decide to stay?" Elena asked. "You could have exposed me, used the information to your advantage. Why didn't you?" Marie was quiet for a moment, considering her words carefully. "Because you saved me from a situation I couldn't escape on my own," she said finally. "And because the woman who helped me wasn't pretending to be kind, she just was kind. Titles don't make people good, princess. Actions do." The simple truth of Marie's words hit Elena harder than Gabriel's sophisticated observations. Here was someone who had seen behind the facade and chosen loyalty not because of who Elena claimed to be, but because of who she actually was when no one was watching. "What if I told you I was considering telling the truth?" Elena asked quietly. "What if I said I was tired of pretending?" Marie's eyes widened slightly, but her expression remained steady. "Then I would say it's about time," she replied, "and I would ask how I can help." Before Elena could respond, the telephone rang. Marie rose to answer it, her voice taking on the professional tone she used with outsiders. "Princess Elena's suite, this is Marie speaking." A pause. "Yes, of course. One moment, please." She turned to Elena, covering the mouthpiece. "It's Prince Gabriel of Montenegro. He's requesting an audience at your convenience." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She had been expecting this call, but dreading it in equal measure. Gabriel's patience had been generous, but she knew it wouldn't last forever. "Tell him I can see him this afternoon," she said finally. 3 o'clock, in the hotel's private garden. As Marie relayed the information, Elena turned back to the blank page before her. Perhaps it was time to start writing a different story, one that began with the truth rather than ending with it. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of preparation. Elena found herself changing clothes 3 times, uncertain whether to dress as Princess Elena or simply as herself. The distinction had become increasingly blurred, and she wasn't sure which version of herself Gabriel expected to see. Finally, she settled on a simple blue dress that was elegant without being ostentatious. It was something Elena Marchetti might have worn, if Elena Marchetti had possessed the means to shop in such exclusive boutiques. The irony wasn't lost on her that even her attempt at authenticity was wrapped in layers of pretense. The Hotel Splendido's private garden was a masterpiece of Mediterranean landscaping, with terraced lawns overlooking the sea and secluded alcoves perfect for confidential conversations. Elena arrived early, needing time to compose herself before facing Gabriel's penetrating questions. She was examining a particularly beautiful rose bush when his voice came from behind her. "They're bourbon roses," Gabriel said, approaching with the quiet confidence she had come to expect from him. "Supposedly created for the royal gardens at Versailles, though I suspect that's more legend than fact." Elena turned to face him, noting how different he looked in the afternoon sunlight. The formal prince from the gala had been replaced by a man in casual slacks and a linen shirt, though he somehow managed to maintain an air of authority even without the trappings of his position. "How appropriate," Elena replied with a rueful smile. "Beautiful illusions seem to be my specialty." Gabriel studied her for a moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he was cataloging every detail of her appearance, every nuance of her demeanor. "May I suggest we walk?" he said finally. "I find that difficult conversations are sometimes easier when we're moving." They fell in a step together along the garden's winding paths, the Mediterranean breeze carrying the scent of jasmine and salt air. For several minutes, neither spoke, content to let the peaceful setting ease the tension between them. "I've been researching your charity work," Gabriel said finally. "The orphanage in Bulgaria, the literacy program in Albania, the medical supplies you've funded for refugee camps. It's quite impressive." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I told you that work is genuine. I may have lied about my identity, but I've never lied about caring for those children." "I believe you," Gabriel replied. "Which brings me to my question. Why does someone capable of such authentic compassion feel the need to hide behind a false identity?" They had reached a secluded bench overlooking the sea, and Elena sank onto it, as if her legs could no longer support her. The question she had been dreading had finally come, and she found herself without the carefully prepared deflections she usually relied upon. "Because compassion doesn't pay for medical supplies," she said quietly. "Because noble intentions don't open doors that are closed to people like me. Because sometimes the only way to help others is to become someone with the power to make a difference." Gabriel settled beside her on the bench, maintaining enough distance to be respectful while still conveying his attention to her words. "People like you," he prompted gently. Elena stared out at the horizon, gathering the courage to speak truth she had buried for 5 years. "I was born Elena Marchetti in Naples," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "My father was a fisherman. My mother cleaned houses for wealthy families. We lived in a tiny apartment above a bakery, and I wore hand-me-downs from the children my mother worked for." She paused, surprised by how foreign her real name sounded after years of royal titles. Gabriel waited patiently, offering no judgment or interruption. "When I was 17, my parents died in a car accident," Elena continued. "I had no other family, no money, no prospects. I was working 3 jobs just to survive when I met a man who promised to take care of me." The memory she had tried so hard to bury came flooding back. The cramped apartment, the constant fear, the gradual realization that Carlo's protection came with a price she wasn't willing to pay. "He was connected to some very dangerous people," Elena said, her voice growing stronger as she pushed through the painful recollections. "At first, he seemed kind, generous. He bought me clothes, took me to nice restaurants, made me feel special. But gradually, I realized I wasn't his girlfriend, I was his possession." Gabriel's expression had grown serious, but he remained silent, allowing her to tell her story at her own pace. "Carlo wanted me to be his representative in certain business dealings. Money laundering, mostly using my appearance and supposed innocence to move funds through legitimate channels. When I refused, he made it clear that refusal wasn't an option." Elena's hands had begun to shake, and she clasped them together in her lap to still them. Even after all these years, The memory of Carlo's threats could still terrify her. I knew that if I stayed, I would either become a criminal or disappear entirely. So I took what little money I had managed to save and ran. But you can't just disappear when you're nobody. Elena Marchetti would always be traceable, always findable. She turned to look at Gabriel directly, needing him to understand the desperation that had driven her choices. Princess Elena of San Marino was born out of necessity. I spent months researching royal genealogies, learning protocols, studying how nobility behaved. I created an identity that was glamorous enough to open doors, but obscure enough to avoid close scrutiny. Gabriel absorbed this information in silence, his expression unreadable. Elena braced herself for the questions that would inevitably follow. Why she hadn't gone to the police, why she had chosen such an elaborate deception, why she continued the charade even after establishing her independence. Instead, he asked something completely unexpected. "Are you still in danger from this man?" The concern in his voice was genuine, and Elena felt something crack inside her chest. After years of carrying this burden alone, someone was finally asking about her safety rather than her crimes. "I don't know," she admitted. "Carlo has connections throughout Europe. If he found out where I was, what I was doing..." She shuddered, unable to finish the thought. Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the sea with an expression of deep thought. "The charity work," he said finally. "When did that start?" "About 2 years after I created the princess identity," Elena replied. "I was attending a gallery opening in Vienna when I met a woman from UNICEF. She was talking about the refugee crisis, about children who had lost everything. It reminded me of my own situation, and I realized I had the resources to help. And that's how you met Antonio." It wasn't a question, and Elena nodded slowly. 6 months ago, at a gallery opening in Florence. He was there representing a private collector, and we ended up talking for hours about art, about history, about the responsibility that comes with privilege. "You care for him," Gabriel observed. "I love him," Elena said simply, the words carrying more pain than joy. "Which is why this is so impossible. Antonio is falling in love with a woman who doesn't exist. How can I build a future with him based on such a fundamental lie?" Gabriel turned to study her profile as she spoke, noting the way her voice softened when she mentioned Antonio's name. "Have you considered that perhaps the woman Antonio loves is more real than you think?" he asked. "The kindness you show to those children, the passion you have for helping others, the way you light up when you talk about art and culture, none of that is false, Elena. That's who you are, regardless of your title or your past." Elena shook her head. "But it's built on deception. Every conversation we've had, every moment we've shared, has been shadowed by my lies. How can I ask him to love the real me when I've never given him the chance to meet her?" "Perhaps," Gabriel suggested gently, "it's time you did." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching sailboats drift across the horizon. Elena found herself surprised by Gabriel's reaction to her story. She had expected judgment, threats, or demands. Instead, she had found understanding and an unexpected ally. "Why are you helping me?" she asked finally. "You could destroy everything I've built with a single phone call. You could expose me to Antonio, to the charity organizations, to everyone who trusts Princess Elena. Why haven't you?" Gabriel was quiet for so long that Elena wondered if he was going to answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of personal experience. "Because I understand what it means to be trapped by circumstances beyond your control," he said. "My own path to the throne wasn't exactly conventional. Sometimes the roles we're forced to play become who we are, for better or worse." Elena sensed there was more to Gabriel's story, but something in his demeanor suggested it wasn't a subject for casual conversation. "What do you think I should do?" she asked. "I think you should tell Antonio the truth," Gabriel replied without hesitation. "Not because you owe it to him, though you do, but because you owe it to yourself. You've been living in fear for 5 years, Elena. Don't you think it's time to see if love is stronger than deception?" The thought terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. After so long building walls to protect herself, the idea of voluntarily tearing them down seemed like madness. "What if he can't forgive me?" she whispered. "Then you'll know where you stand," Gabriel said practically. "But what if he can? What if the man who fell in love with your compassion and intelligence is strong enough to love your truth as well?" Elena considered this, feeling a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in years. Genuine hope. "And what about you?" she asked. "What do you want from me in all of this?" Gabriel's smile was enigmatic. "I want to see what happens when someone I find fascinating stops pretending to be someone else." The admission hung between them. Charged with possibilities Elena wasn't sure she was ready to explore. Gabriel's interest in her was becoming increasingly clear, but it was complicated by her feelings for Antonio and the web of deception that still surrounded her. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to figure out how to tell Antonio. Time to decide what comes next." "Of course," Gabriel agreed. "But, Elena, don't take too long. The longer you wait, the harder it becomes to find the courage to change." As they walked back toward the hotel, Elena felt as though she was standing at the edge of a cliff. Behind her lay 5 years of careful construction, a life built on beautiful lies that had given her safety and purpose. Ahead lay the unknown territory of truth, with all its risks and possibilities. That evening, Elena finally returned Antonio's calls. His voice was warm with relief when he heard from her, and the genuine affection in his tone made her chest tighten with guilt and longing. "Elena, I was starting to worry something had happened," he said. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she replied, settling into the chair by her window. "Just dealing with some complicated family matters." The lie came easily, as they always did, but it left a bitter taste in her mouth. Gabriel's words echoed in her mind. "The longer you wait, the harder it becomes." "I hope everything resolves itself soon," Antonio said. "I miss you. It feels like we've barely had any time together lately." "I miss you too," Elena admitted, surprised by how true the words were. Despite everything, despite the deception, her feelings for Antonio were genuine. "About Rome," Antonio continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "I know you said your schedule might not allow for it, but, Elena, what I want to discuss with you is important. To both of us." Elena closed her eyes, knowing what was coming and feeling powerless to stop it. "I've been thinking about our future together," Antonio said. "About what we mean to each other. I know it might seem sudden, but when you know something is right—" "Antonio," Elena interrupted gently. "Can we talk about this when I see you next? Some conversations are too important for the telephone." There was a pause, and she could practically hear Antonio's smile through the phone. "You're right, of course. But, Elena, I love you. I hope you know that." The words hit her like a physical blow. After hanging up, Elena sat in the growing darkness of her suite, staring out at the lights beginning to twinkle across the coastline. Antonio's declaration of love should have filled her with joy, but instead it felt like another weight added to the burden she already carried. 3 days later, Elena made her decision. She called Gabriel first, asking him to meet her at a small cafe in the old town of Monaco. When he arrived, she was already seated at a corner table, dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, perhaps the closest she had come to being herself in public in years. "I'm going to tell him," she said without preamble as Gabriel joined her. "Tomorrow. I've asked Antonio to meet me in Florence, at the gallery where we first met." Gabriel's expression showed approval mixed with concern. "How do you plan to approach it?" "Honestly," Elena replied with a rueful laugh. "I suppose after 5 years of elaborate deceptions, simple truth is the most radical approach I could take." "And after you tell him? What then?" Elena stirred her coffee absently, considering the question that had been keeping her awake for days. "I don't know," she admitted. "If Antonio can forgive me, maybe we can find a way to build something real together. If not," she shrugged, trying to appear more casual than she felt, "I suppose Princess Elena will have to disappear, one way or another." Gabriel leaned forward, his expression serious. "Elena, there's something I want you to consider. Whatever happens with Antonio, you don't have to disappear. The work you're doing, The lives you're touching, that matters. There might be a way to continue that work without the royal pretense. You mean confess to everyone? Elena asked, the idea both terrifying and liberating. I mean transition gradually. Establish yourself as Elena Marchetti, a private philanthropist with a passion for helping others. Your connections in the charity world are genuine. They know your work, your dedication. Some might be hurt by the deception, but most will care more about your continued support than your past titles. It was a possibility Elena hadn't considered, and she found herself intrigued despite her fears. "Would you help me?" she asked impulsively, then immediately felt foolish for the request. Gabriel's answer was immediate. Yes. The simple certainty in his voice surprised her. "Why? What do you get out of helping someone who's been lying to everyone she meets?" Gabriel was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability she hadn't heard before. "Maybe because I recognize someone else who's tired of pretending," he said. "The crown comes with its own kinds of deception, Elena. Sometimes the most authentic thing you can do is admit that you're not who everyone thinks you are." Elena studied his face, seeing something new in his expression. "What are you not telling me?" Gabriel's smile was rueful. "Perhaps that's a conversation for another day. Tomorrow, you have more pressing matters to attend to." That evening, Elena packed carefully for her trip to Florence. She chose clothes that were elegant but understated, outfits that could belong to either Princess Elena or Elena Marchetti. It seemed symbolic somehow, this blurring of the lines between her identities. Marie helped her prepare, offering quiet support and practical assistance. As Elena was finishing her packing, Marie presented her with a small wrapped box. "What's this?" Elena asked. "Something I thought you might need tomorrow," Marie replied. "For courage." Elena unwrapped the box to find a simple gold necklace with a small pendant. Not valuable by royal standards, but obviously chosen with care. "It's beautiful, Marie." "Thank you. It belonged to my mother," Marie said quietly. "She always told me that the truth was the only thing that could never be taken away from you." Elena felt tears prick her eyes as she fastened the necklace. After 5 years of expensive jewelry and borrowed elegance, this simple gift felt more precious than all the sapphires and diamonds in her collection. As her plane lifted off from Nice the next morning, Elena watched the coastline disappear beneath her and wondered if she would ever see it again as Princess Elena. Tomorrow's conversation with Antonio would determine not just the fate of their relationship, but the future of the identity she had spent 5 years perfecting. For the first time since creating her royal persona, Elena found herself curious rather than terrified about what lay ahead. Gabriel's words had planted a seed of possibility, that perhaps the truth wouldn't destroy everything, but transform it into something more authentic and, ultimately, more meaningful. The flight to Florence was turbulent, matching Elena's emotional state as she rehearsed different ways to begin the most important conversation of her life. By the time the plane touched down, she had discarded dozens of opening lines and settled on something that felt both simple and impossible. "Antonio, my name isn't Elena, and I'm not a princess." Everything that happened next would depend on what followed those words, and for the first time in 5 years, Elena found herself eager to discover who she might become when she stopped trying to be someone else. The Gallery Rossini looked exactly as Elena remembered it from that magical evening 6 months ago when she had first encountered Antonio. The warm golden lighting, the carefully curated collection of Renaissance masterpieces, the intimate alcoves where passionate art lovers could lose themselves in scholarly debate. It was here that she had fallen in love with a man who deserved so much better than the lies she was about to confess. Elena arrived 30 minutes early, needing time to compose herself before the most important conversation of her life. She stood before Botticelli's Madonna and Child, studying the serene expression on the Madonna's face and wondering if she would ever feel that kind of peace again. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" came a familiar voice behind her. Elena turned to find Antonio approaching with that warm smile that had captured her heart from their very first meeting. He looked handsome in his charcoal suit, every inch the successful art dealer, and she felt her resolve waver as he leaned in to kiss her cheek. "You look pale," Antonio observed, concern creeping into his voice. "Are you feeling well?" "I'm fine," Elena lied automatically, then caught herself. "Actually, no, I'm not fine. Antonio, we need to talk." Something in her tone must have alarmed him, because his expression grew serious immediately. "Of course. Should we go somewhere more private?" Elena nodded, and he led her to a small office behind the main gallery space. The room was lined with art books and filled with the tools of Antonio's trade: magnifying glasses, authentication documents, and carefully controlled lighting for examining delicate works. It was here, surrounded by the apparatus of determining authenticity, that Elena would finally tell the truth about her own fabricated existence. Antonio closed the door and turned to face her, his brown eyes full of concern and love. The genuine affection in his gaze made what she was about to do feel like the cruelest betrayal imaginable. "Elena, whatever's troubling you, we can work through it together," he said, reaching for her hands. That's what people who love each other do. The word love hung in the air between them, and Elena felt her carefully rehearsed speech crumble in her throat. How could she destroy something so beautiful, so pure, with the ugly truth of her deception? "Antonio," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "before you say anything else, before we go any further with this relationship, there's something I have to tell you. Something that will change everything between us." Antonio's grip on her hands tightened slightly, but his expression remained open and trusting. "Nothing could change how I feel about you." The certainty in his voice made Elena's heart break a little more. "Please, just listen. Let me get through this before you decide whether that's still true." She took a deep breath, feeling as though she was about to step off a precipice into unknown territory. "My name isn't Princess Elena of San Marino," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "It isn't Elena at all. My real name is Elena Marchetti. I was born in Naples, and I'm not royalty. I'm not even nobility. I'm the daughter of a fisherman and a cleaning woman, and everything you think you know about me is a lie I created 5 years ago." Antonio's hands went very still in hers, but he didn't let go. His expression shifted from concern to confusion, as if he was trying to process information that didn't make sense. "I don't understand," he said slowly. "What do you mean? You're not a princess?" Elena could see his mind working, trying to reconcile this revelation with everything he knew about her. The elegant bearing, the perfect manners, the extensive knowledge of art and culture, none of it fit with his image of a fisherman's daughter from Naples. "I mean that Princess Elena of San Marino is a complete fabrication," Elena continued, her voice growing stronger as she pushed through the terror of confession. "I created her because I needed to disappear, because I was running from a dangerous situation, and Elena Marchetti had nowhere to hide." She told him everything then: her parents' death, her desperate circumstances, Carlo's threats, and her elaborate plan to reinvent herself. Antonio listened in silence, his expression becoming more unreadable with each revelation. When she finished, the silence stretched between them like a chasm. "Let me understand this correctly," Antonio said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "You're telling me that for the past 6 months, every conversation we've had, every moment we've shared has been based on a complete lie?" "No," Elena said urgently, "not everything. My feelings for you are real, Antonio. The woman you fell in love with, her thoughts, her passions, her care for you, that's all genuine. Only the background was false." Antonio released her hands and stepped back, running his fingers through his dark hair in a gesture of agitation she had never seen from him before. "Only the background," he repeated, his voice rising slightly. "Elena, or whatever your name really is, your background is who you are. It's your history, your family, your entire identity. How can you say that's only a small part of the deception?" "Because the person I became wasn't just a performance," Elena insisted, desperation creeping into her voice. "Yes, I created Princess Elena, but In becoming her, I discovered parts of myself I never knew existed. The charity work, the passion for art, the way I feel when I'm with you, none of that was an act. Antonio had begun pacing the small office, his movements sharp and agitated. Elena had never seen him like this, and it frightened her more than his anger would have. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me?" he asked, turning to face her with an expression of pain that made Elena flinch. "I've spent months falling in love with someone who doesn't exist. I've been planning a future with a ghost." "I exist," Elena said softly. "I'm standing right here, telling you the truth because I love you too much to keep lying." "Are you?" Antonio challenged. "Because the woman I love would never have been capable of such elaborate deception. The woman I love has integrity, honesty, a moral compass that guides her charitable work. How does that reconcile with someone who has been living a lie for 5 years?" Each word felt like a physical blow, but Elena forced herself to stand firm. "The woman you love grew out of that deception, Antonio. I became someone better than I was because I had the freedom to choose who I wanted to be. By stealing someone else's identity? San Marino hasn't had a royal family in over a century," Elena protested. "I wasn't stealing from anyone real. You were stealing from me." Antonio exploded, his careful control finally cracking. "You stole my trust, my love, my ability to make an informed choice about my own life. Do you think that matters less than some defunct royal title?" Elena felt tears pricking her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had expected his anger, but the depth of his pain was harder to bear than she had imagined. "I was going to tell you," she said. "That's why I asked you to meet me here. I couldn't keep lying to you, especially not when you were talking about our future." Antonio's laugh was bitter. "You're going to tell me? How generous. And when exactly were you planning this revelation? Before or after I proposed?" The question hit Elena like a physical blow, confirming what she had suspected about his intentions. "Antonio, I bought a ring," he continued, his voice flat with shock and disillusionment. "I've been carrying it around for a week, trying to find the perfect moment to ask the woman I love to marry me. A woman who apparently never existed." Elena sank into one of the office chairs, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what her deception had cost them both. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know that's not enough, but I am so incredibly sorry." "Sorry doesn't undo 6 months of lies," Antonio replied. "Sorry doesn't give me back my ability to trust my own judgment. How do I know that anything you've ever told me was true?" "Because you know me," Elena said, looking up at him with desperate eyes. "You know how I react to art, how I laugh at your stories, how I feel about helping those children. You know the woman I am when I'm with you." "Do I?" Antonio asked. "Or do I just know the performance you've perfected over 5 years of practice?" The question hung in the air between them, and Elena realized she didn't have a good answer. The line between performance and authenticity had become so blurred in her own mind that she wasn't entirely sure where one ended and the other began. Antonio moved to the window, staring out at the narrow Florentine street with its ancient buildings and tourist crowds. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but no less devastating. "The worst part is that I can see it now," he said. "All the little inconsistencies I explained away because I was so enamored with you. The way you never talked about your childhood in detail, how you deflected questions about your family, the gaps in your knowledge of San Marino's history." Elena felt sick as she realized how many clues she had inadvertently left, how Antonio's love had blinded him to evidence that might have exposed her earlier. "I thought I was protecting you by keeping those secrets," she said weakly. "You were protecting yourself," Antonio corrected, turning back to face her. "And maybe I can understand that, given what you've told me about your past. But, Elena, you continued to lie to me even after we became close. Even after you knew you could trust me. I was afraid," Elena admitted. "Afraid of losing you. Afraid of losing everything I had built. So, instead you chose to build our relationship on a foundation of lies, hoping I would never find out. How is that love, Elena? How is that anything other than selfishness?" The accusation stung because Elena couldn't entirely deny it. Yes, she had been protecting herself. Yes, She had chosen the safety of deception over the risk of truth. But her feelings for Antonio were genuine, even if everything else had been fabricated. "You're right," she said finally. "I was selfish. I was scared and selfish, and I made choices that hurt you. But my love for you is real, Antonio. That's the one thing I never had to pretend." Antonio studied her face for a long moment, and Elena thought she saw something soften in his expression. For a brief instant, she dared to hope that love might be stronger than betrayal. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, placing it on the desk between them. "I was going to ask you to marry me tonight," he said quietly. "I had it all planned out, dinner at that little restaurant you love, a walk along the Arno, then back here where we first met. I thought it would be romantic, proposing in the place where our love story began." Elena stared at the ring box, as if it were a poisonous snake. The symbol of the future they might have had together now represented everything she had destroyed with her deception. "But there is no love story, is there?" Antonio continued. "There's just a very elaborate con that I fell for, because I wanted to believe in fairy tales." "That's not fair," Elena protested. "What we have together is real, regardless of how it began." "Is it?" Antonio asked. "Because I don't even know who you are anymore. The woman I fell in love with was compassionate, honest, noble in every sense of the word. But the person sitting in front of me has been lying to my face for 6 months." "I'm the same person," Elena insisted. "The only difference is that you know the truth now." "The truth changes everything," Antonio replied. "It changes every memory we've made, every conversation we've had. It makes me question every moment of happiness I've felt with you." Elena felt something break inside her chest. She had known this conversation would be difficult, but she hadn't anticipated the complete dissolution of everything they had shared. "What can I do?" she asked desperately. "How can I prove to you that my feelings are genuine?" Antonio was quiet for a long moment, considering her question with the serious attention he gave to authenticating a questionable artwork. "I don't know if you can," he said finally. "How do I trust someone who has demonstrated such an extraordinary capacity for deception? How do I believe anything you tell me when you've proven you can lie without any apparent difficulty?" "Because I'm telling you the truth now," Elena said. "Because I chose to risk everything rather than keep lying to you." "You chose to tell me after you got caught," Antonio countered. "If that prince hadn't figured out who you really were, would you ever have told me voluntarily?" Elena started to protest, then stopped. The truth was, she didn't know. Gabriel's discovery had forced her hand. But would she have found the courage to confess on her own? She wanted to believe she would have, but she couldn't be certain. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "Maybe not. Maybe I would have kept living the lie, because it was easier than facing this." Her honesty seemed to surprise Antonio, and for a moment his expression softened again. "At least that's honest," he said. "It's more honesty than I've gotten from you in 6 months." They stood in silence for several minutes, the weight of the situation settling between them like a wall. Elena could see Antonio processing everything she had told him, trying to reconcile the woman he loved with the person who had deceived him so completely. "I need time," he said finally. "Time to think. Time to figure out if there's any way forward from here." "How much time?" Elena asked, hating how desperate she sounded. "I don't know," Antonio replied. "Maybe a lot. Maybe forever." The words hit Elena like a physical blow, but she forced herself to nod. "I understand." Antonio picked up the ring box from the desk, staring at it for a moment before slipping it back into his pocket. The gesture felt like a door closing on all their shared dreams. "There's something else you should know," he said quietly. "I've been commissioned to authenticate some pieces for a private collector in Rome. The job would take me away from Florence for several months." Elena felt a chill of premonition. "When do you leave?" "Tomorrow," Antonio replied. "I was going to tell you tonight after everything was different." The timing felt like another twist of the knife. Not only was their relationship shattered, but Antonio would be leaving immediately, making any chance of reconciliation even more difficult. "Will you call me?" Elena asked, then immediately felt foolish for the question. I don't know, Antonio said honestly. Right now, I can't even look at you without feeling like I'm talking to a stranger. Elena nodded, accepting the brutal honesty because it was more than she deserved. She had forfeited the right to comfort when she chose deception over truth. I should go, she said, rising from her chair on unsteady legs. Let you process everything. Antonio didn't argue, which somehow hurt more than if he had asked her to stay and fight for their relationship. Elena paused at the office door, looking back at the man she loved and might be losing forever. Antonio, for what it's worth, the woman you fell in love with wasn't entirely fabricated. She was who I became when I felt safe enough to be better than I ever thought I could be. That woman exists because you loved her into being. Antonio's expression was unreadable as he absorbed her words. Maybe, he said finally, but I don't know if that's enough anymore. Elena left the gallery feeling as though she were walking through a dream, or rather, a nightmare. The ancient streets of Florence, which had seemed so romantic during her previous visits with Antonio, now felt like a maze designed to trap her in her misery. She called Gabriel from her hotel room that evening, needing to talk to someone who understood the complexity of her situation. How did it go? He asked immediately upon hearing her voice. About as well as you'd expect, Elena replied, sinking into the armchair by the window. He's devastated, angry, hurt. I don't think he'll ever forgive me. Give him time, Gabriel said gently. This kind of revelation takes processing. He's leaving for Rome tomorrow, Elena continued. Some authentication project that will keep him away for months. I think he's running from me. Gabriel was quiet for a moment. Maybe that's for the best. Distance might give you both perspective, or it might give him time to decide he never wants to see me again, Elena replied miserably. Elena, you did the right thing by telling him the truth. That took tremendous courage. Courage, Elena laughed bitterly. I destroyed the best thing in my life because I was too cowardly to be honest from the beginning. You made a mistake, Gabriel acknowledged. A big one. But you're trying to fix it now. That has to count for something. Elena wasn't sure she believed him, but his support was comforting nonetheless. What do I do now? Now you decide who you want to be going forward, Gabriel replied. You've told Antonio the truth. Are you ready to extend that honesty to the rest of your life? The question Elena had been dreading finally arrived. If she lost Antonio anyway, what was the point of maintaining the princess charade? But abandoning Princess Elena meant giving up everything she had built, her social connections, her charitable work, her carefully constructed safety net. I don't know if I'm strong enough to lose everything, Elena admitted. You're stronger than you think, Gabriel said with quiet conviction. And you might be surprised by how many people care more about your work than your title. After hanging up with Gabriel, Elena spent the night staring out at the lights of Florence, thinking about identity and authenticity and the price of living a lie. She had thought that telling Antonio the truth would be the hardest part, but now she realized it might have been the easy part compared to what came next. The next morning, Elena made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of returning to Monaco to hide in her royal suite, she took a train to Rome, not to chase after Antonio, but to visit the children's hospital where Princess Elena had made her largest charitable donation. She wanted to see if the work meant as much without the title, if the lives she had touched would still welcome Elena Marchetti the way they had embraced Princess Elena. It was time to find out if the person she had become was strong enough to exist without the lies that had created her. As the train pulled away from Florence, Elena caught a glimpse of the Gallery Rossini in the distance. Somewhere in that building, the man she loved was preparing to leave, carrying with him the ring he had meant to offer her, and the shattered trust she had destroyed. She pressed her palm against the window, a silent goodbye to the life she might have had if only she had been brave enough to choose truth over safety from the very beginning. Now she would have to learn if redemption was possible for someone who had built their entire existence on beautiful lies. The train gathered speed, carrying her toward an uncertain future where Princess Elena might cease to exist, and Elena Marchetti would have to prove she was worthy of the love she had thrown away.